basically, Pac-Man talked about a couple of the things. He's always been very, very focused on the total value locked on the Blur contract. It's always felt like a North Star from the way he talks about things. And, two of his frustrations were gas costs, of course, which decayed TVL, and then also that people kept their ETH there and they weren't earning interest. If you have ETH staked, you can earn 4% interest. So he's creating Blast, which is an L2, where the goal is to make it so people naturally who have their ETH on there can accrue interest at whatever staking yield is while they're waiting to do other things with their ETH. Obviously, lower gas costs, which is something that a lot of L2s have tackled so far. But it's interesting because presumably this Blast token will be a very valuable token. So what you're seeing right now is a lot of people farming Blur again, because if you farm Blur, you're going to get the Blast token. You can also get the token by putting your ETH into the Blast contract, locking it up there until February, playing different games with spins and stuff like that if you refer friends and tell other people to join. But overall, this has been a huge topic recently. So that's kind of the crux of it.
Yeah, the Blast is fascinating because it's I do like the fact that you're actually earning some yield for the first time on your ETH, which is great. How many people have banged on the only real risk, in my opinion, is like smart contract risk here, right? Like if you're locking up ETH in a new contract, it sounds like they're using Lido on the back end and Maker, is that right, to kind of produce
for the USDC deposits?
Yeah. So I'm curious, Sam, do you have any sense of like, do they do a formal audits on their contracts? Like that's the scary part of like considering to put any ETH into this new contract.
I don't know, but I'm sure they do formal audits, and I'm sure that security. Pac-Man's a good operator. I think he knows that security, one mess up in security, and your whole reputation is destroyed. And I think he gets that and takes security very seriously. People were, on the Blur contract, it said like command, like you just had, it just gave you a string and you signed your wallet to it. And, very unclear what you were signing if you didn't know or didn't trust that this was something to trust. And, they've had TVL or they've had $150 million locked on that contract, and overall haven't had serious security issues with it. So I think like people who are in the NFT ecosystem are a little bit more used to this kind of structure where you're just kind of trusting this guy, and it's worked so far. But I can see where a whole new ecosystem is a little bit kind of shocked by it, because so many people are getting exposure to him now that haven't had exposure like we have for the past 12 months.
Yeah,
I'm curious to see, who's locking up their ETH. If you're locking up your ETH, if you're participating in this, drop it in the chat. Let me know if you're doing it, and if you are, why or why not. I'm very curious because, as I think we've covered this. Like a lot of people were able to claim their Blur token after season 2 wrapped. And the option was to lock up your Blur into Blast. So some people either just got off that ride right then, or some people actually just were like, you know what, this was more than I expected. I'm just gonna go on to this next phase. So I'm wondering how many people just got off the ride and how many people stayed on.
Yeah, let's ask that question in the community, and then I guess the big question for me and Derek, I know you're a little conflicted here because you're an investor in Blur. So, but I'm curious to get everyone's point of view here. Like, for when I look at this and I see what Blur is doing, I mean, now they have 2 big tokens under management here, and it just begs the question, like, why? I get that they created a new token for this new L2. Could they not have used Blur for that? It's like, it's a little bit of like, if you only have so much capital and you want to back Blur, where do I go here?
Yeah.
Do I go Blast? Do I go Blur? Like, it's hard from a consumer standpoint to understand, okay, is there going to be a third token in another 6 months? Like, why yet another token?
Yeah, these are all good questions. I can't speak for the team. I'm actually not an investor in Blast.
But Blur.
But I am I think you said it right. I'm not an investor in Blast. I actually didn't know about the L2 architecture at all until everyone else knew about it. What I will say is, I'll tackle a couple of things. I think the first thing you mentioned a few minutes ago was kind of the smart contract risk. To be clear, so far the L2 environment doesn't exist. So there isn't a ton of complexity around possible surface area or attack vectors. It's really a multi-sig.
Multi-sig that's going straight into Lido.
Exactly. That acts as a front
Okay.
end for Lido and Maker on the USD side and Lido on the East side.
And Lido's been battle tested. Obviously, massive amounts of money in Lido over the last several years.
Totally.
It's the biggest LSD, liquid staking
You've got
derivative
it.
that's out there. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So to be clear, like the complexity is not zero, or like the possible attack surface area is not zero currently. But yeah, I just want to be clear that there's just not a ton of complexity on like the design architecture yet for there to be a ton of issues. But I mean, this is crypto, so there's always things that can
Yeah.
come up. The second thing I'll say is just in terms of the thinking, and I haven't had a chance to sit down with Pac-Man or talk through this with him at all, but just looking at kind of the design decisions of what's happening here, the L2 environment really does unlock a lot for being able to build complex financial protocols in an environment that's a little bit more conducive for cheap transactions, fast speed, and when you've got this native yield that's being generated, there's all sorts of other financial products that you can build on top of that, in addition to some of what the first Blur product offers. And so you can imagine a situation where over time these things, the Blur exchange and the platform and the protocol itself, ends up optimizing for something completely unrelated than what the L2 needs to optimize for to make it a credibly neutral architecture for other protocols to build on top of it.
Do you know, one of the questions I would have for you is like, there's so many L2s that are out there. And when you guys, Sam, Amanda, everyone else wants to chime in, when you think about just, the traction that these have, they all have varying degrees of traction. They all have varying underlying technologies. Some are roll-ups. It's like there's kind of a battle for who's going to win the L2 space. And maybe it's not a winner take all. Maybe it's fragmented. But, it's like, why, if you're Pac-Man, and I know you haven't talked to him about this, but if you're Pac-Man, do you need to own that full stack? Why couldn't you, like Base, for example, it's pretty damn cheap to mint things on Base. Like, why not just embrace something that has Coinbase's scale, go with the pre-existing L2, save the headache, and just focus on Blur? Yeah.
If you look at kind of the thread he put out publicly, I think he has a viewpoint, and I don't disagree with some of this thinking, that there is just like what crypto economics and blockchains and trust minimized ledgers on a global environment allow for is this inevitable march towards optimization. And his viewpoint is none of the current L2 architectures are built or designed in the way that he believes like that optimization or that march towards efficiency will inevitably happen, which is this native yield that gets generated for ETH deposits that get bridged over to these L2s. And so the fundamental design constraint is, can we actually start generating native yields for
on
ETH
an L2?
On an L2.
It's kind of awesome.
Say what you will about the marketing mechanism by which he's bringing people over. The experiment needs to be run in terms of just like, we are in a space where we can borrow and mix and match ideas, and it makes all the other L2s better. They can start architecting in similar fashion if it proves itself out. And so there is something to be said about watching these public experiments get run and then having the space be able to recalibrate and rebuild based on what other people are doing.
As an investor and holder of crypto, taking out your investment in Blur for a second, would you ever at the fund level consider going in and actually locking up some ETH here?
Unfortunately, I can't answer that.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right.
Oh, it's so tight. Sam funny.
Can answer that. Sam, have you invested any into Blast?
I have.
Unfortunately, I can't answer that.
I mean,
Eli's in the chat right
I'm
now,
not an
actually.
investor, so I can't answer it. Similar to Derek, I'm not an investor, so I also can't answer it. No, I'm just kidding. My view here is that I think Pac-Man is one of the most ambitious people in the space. Like, kind of, he has an ambition level that is pretty unparalleled.
Yes.
in what I've seen. They spent over $300 million. They didn't spend they put $300 million out in incentives to the community on Blur, and as of last month had 2,000 daily active users after spending $300 million in incentives. This guy wants to go big. I think he wants to go big. He doesn't want to use other people's chains. He sees problems. He wants to solve them himself. And I think right now you have a guy who's saying, why would I use one? Polygon, Arbitrum, like Polygon's $8-9 billion fully diluted valuation. That's where that's the space that I think Pac-Man wants to be in, and I think he wants to be one of the kind of headline guys in the space over the coming year. I think that's what we're going to see. We've seen how aggressive he is over the past year, and I think we're going to see more of that over the next year with a much wider audience and a lot more people in the crypto community who are noticing just kind of how ambitious and talented this person is.
I have a question. Do you think that he might have chosen another chain if they were called Blaze or Polygon or Blarbitrum?
Blarbitrum. He loves the bees. Blarbitrum could be our new.
It could have.
Shit, let's do it.
I was on a Spaces. I was on a Spaces with 1,000 people from DeFi, and they could not keep them straight. Someone was like, yeah, it's really interesting with Blur and their token. And the other guy's like, yeah, and you get 4% yield. I'm like, no, that's not Blur. That's not Blur. That's the other one. That's Blast. Like these are experts. No one can keep it straight.
And Blend,
but it's
a lot.
And Blend, that's the fun of it all. So
yeah,
I'm excited though. I think it's interesting to watch. It's, what he's doing very, very well. And you can't take that away from him.
It is definitely, farming season. As somebody who spends a lot of time in our Discord and in other Discords, there was a nice, fun couple of days where it was just blast codes. It was crazy. And then all of a sudden it was Portal Coin. Everyone kind of moved over. But I think that, Pac-Man will know how to bring the attention right back to it. It's interesting to see. I think I'm reading the chat right now.
Yeah.
Got a couple people saying, it's a marketing gimmick. This is just a vaporware coin. And then we've got Marty McFly in the chat who says he's pro Blast. And then we also have Eli Scheinman, who I'm pretty sure is trolling, who said he sent 0.5 to Blast. But maybe he just meant 50 cents. We'll see.
The thing that it gives me, I'm not saying it's about Pac-Man, so this is not pertain to him, but like after SBF went down, and I thought of him as such a, at the time back in the day, as a really credible player in the space. I'm like a little bit gun shy for anything new.
Totally
I don't know.
valid.
I just kind of got
That's
that
totally valid.
And it's not. This isn't a slam on Pac-Man. I'm just saying, like, if there were any project out there that isn't like, and he was doxxed, right? And he was like backed by some of the best VCs. So I don't know. It's just a little gut weird thing that I get.
I think it's important to, like every person's appetite is different. Every person's portfolio looks different. And so it's really important to just understand intuitively, like what type of person you are and what you want to interact with and where you sit on the risk curve.
Yes,
So.
that's exactly right.